let's see. So this is The Jokes on Hugh, The Performative Possibilities of Humor by Lisa McKeown, hailing from the New School for Social Research. And this is forthcoming I think this was just published in the Nordic Wittgenstein Review, their special issue for 2022 on Wittgenstein and feminism and related stuff. So, as always, feel free to ask questions. You want to know what annoys me? When I can't get my stupid streaming software to work. That annoys me. I wish I could do that. And I have to, if you have any ideas, I need ideas for emotes for rating papers. Like, do I need a wisdom emote? Do I need a, ivory tower emote for, things that are just, navel gazing, philosophy? That's the sort of thing I need to think about. I need to, so I can, finally start reviewing papers on my stream, properly. Give people 3 super wisdom emotes and 1 navel gazing emote, and then that way you could have some sort of numeric value on the quality of your paper. Alright, so here we go, and feel free to ask questions. Although humor has been discussed let me drop music a little bit. Although humor has been discussed in philosophy, most of what you will find are theories about what makes something funny. In his 2002 book on humor, Simon Critchley outlines 3 broad theories: the superiority theory, the relief theory, and the incongruity theory. The superiority theory, which has been around since the ancient Greeks, suggests we take pleasure in our superiority over others. The relief theory emerged in the 19th century in the writings of Herbert Spencer, further popularized by Freud, suggesting that laughter is a release of nervous energy. Yeah, you can see this is always kind of fun. People don't realize that nervous energy was literally a hydraulic system. That's how they thought we worked, like a hydraulic machine. And so when you were built up of energy, it was like you were overpressuring a hydraulic machine, and you'd have to release it, like steam gets released from a car when it overheats. So that's kind of what they thought laughter was. It was kind of like steam releasing from our nerves. Okay, the incongruity theory suggests that humor arises from the distance between our expectations and the picture the joke presents. I suspect humor involves all of this at different times in different ways. In this paper, I am more interested in examining some aspects of humor's performative power in the context of a public exchange. Although taking into account why certain utterances are funny is relevant for the conversation, my main focus will be on its particular discursive force. Within feminist epistemology, much has been made about implicit bias stemming from knowledge gaps. Yet studies have shown that education and awareness of our implicit bias does little to change our behavior. This is one of the most interesting things that I think that's come out of all of this. You can know that you're biased, you can know everything you want to know about implicit bias, and it doesn't change how people are. You can educate them about their biases, they still are biased. Instead, I argue that overcoming bias might at times require a less intellectual, more creative approach. Wittgenstein speculated that one could write a book of philosophy entirely in the form of jokes. In part, he thought that jokes offer an illuminating synopsis or overview of a state of affairs. We might even say jokes offer a fresh gestalt. It's not just about a picture of the facts, but our attitude towards them. Politically speaking, humor can be used to include and to exclude, to oppress, but also to undermine those in power. Regarding the latter, innumerable contemporary examples range from Rowan Atkinson and Hugh Laurie's parodying the aristocracy in Blackadder, to Sarah Cooper lip-syncing to Trump's speech on TikTok. In this paper, I argue that humor is an underutilized tool in countering social injustice in everyday discourse. I think what she just said there is wrong. I think people do it all the time. I think it may just be an understudied one, not an underutilized tool. What do you mean by underutilized? I think it's just understudied. That's horrible. Arrowing. More specifically, in cases where someone utters a demeaning or marginalizing comment, while it can be tempting to respond directly with outrage and indignation, there is a powerful effect when we respond with a joke. Specifically, there are 2 discursive effects of this move. One of humor's many possibilities, I argue, is that it reframes the facts we already have, giving us not so much different information as a more emotional reorientation towards the facts. This reorientation is, in Wittgensteinian terms, a drawing of in Wittgenstein's terms, a drawing of a new aspect that offers a new meaning or way of seeing our everyday experiences. This feature of comedy can be used to illuminate the often invisible perspective of an oppressed class, drawing particular attention to potential harms. Second, the joke can allow the speaker to make a lateral conversational move in the moment, one that evades the limitations of direct responses. Okay, so basically, crack a joke, release the tension in the conversation, allows you to, continue on without having to be directly engaged with like a heinous insult or something, because that's hard to deal with, because sometimes people say something and they may not mean it so badly. They may have said something very bad and they don't mean anything that badly, and so it's hard to directly engage with that, because then it calls them out for saying something completely heinous. Many times they don't always mean to be so heinous. So like if the person's talking in a freely, but like they say and they don't mean to be hurtful, then you have to have a softer touch, and I think humor can do that. Okay, 1. Discursive cornering. One consequence of being the object of a sexist utterance is that the recipient finds herself in a double bind. Either she responds defensively or deflects it, passing it off as no big deal. Consider the cat call. Often the speaker defends it as a compliment, but in reality the person who utters it forces a woman into playing a supportive role in the performance of his masculinity. Either she submits to the performance and accepts the objectification, or she pushes back, which risks escalation. People always, I like this point, people do not realize how much escalation is an issue when dealing with just basically everything. Why are you escalating a problem when there could be other ways to deal with it? Okay, this kind of discursive cornering isn't just a product of the limited content we have at our disposal, but also because catcalls, among other things, also take advantage of the limited aesthetic position in the object of the cat call. This is an interesting sentence. Take advantage of the limited aesthetic position the object of the cat call finds herself in. Patricia Hill Collins has written about problems of patriarchal family structures, which normalize gender and age hierarchies in ways that seep out beyond the nuclear family, making it difficult for women, for example, to be taken seriously in public as well as in private life. It's no surprise that women's claims of sexism are often not taken seriously, but Collins' more specific point is that our voices sound whiny and childlike because we are asserting ourselves beyond our natural station. In other words, there is an undeniable aesthetic barrier to be taken seriously. This means that any attempt at straightforward pushback begins with us on our back foot. This seems like an old, 1998, Collins 1998. I think I've heard this phrase differently, but like, do women really sound whiny and childlike? I guess that does. Fair enough. Like, people do say they sound, screechy, bitchy, other things, like unfair statements. I just haven't heard these phrases in a while. Maybe they're, I don't know. I just haven't heard that. They call women shrill or something, or like other stupid things. But, yeah, it's fair. Whatever. The whole point is that it's the epistemic sort of discounting of what women have to say. Like, they don't actually know what they're talking about because for dumb reasons. So, okay. Another point of background I want to note here is that research into implicit bias has shown that simply being intellectually aware of our biases doesn't eradicate them. Anthony Greenwald, the psychologist who developed the test that exposes implicit bias, was interviewed by Knowable magazine last year in the wake of the murder of George Floyd. In the interview, he acknowledges that simply making people aware of their biases doesn't have an impact on their biases themselves. When asked what might be effective, Greenwald says that in the short term, taking human judgment out of the equation as much as possible helps. Beyond that, Greenwald admits he isn't sure what the long-term solution is. I submit that humor provides edifying opportunities that have more of an impact on our understanding than simple facts, while also helping the recipients of slurs or disparaging comments to evade the discursive cornering of the double bind. Okay. Jokes as sensus communis. I don't know what this Latin is. Towards the end of his book on humor, Critchley aligning himself somewhat with Shaftesbury, suggests that humor is a function of the sensus communis. Contrary to Hobbes, who thinks that laughter is that passion that hath no name, the implicit being that humor is an expression of our animistic rather than intellectual selves, for Shaftesbury, jokes are expressions of meaning. When an audience laughs at a joke, they are grasping something that has a shared meaning or resonance. I mean, this seems right. You don't laugh at a joke when someone doesn't get a joke. You feel kind of stupid. Well, not stupid. You feel like you've missed out on something. So you're lacking the meaning that other people have here. So, like, this is a good point. That there is a semantic feature to jokes. That there's a meaning there that either you get it or you didn't. And then if you have to have it explained, it seems like it's missed the point. As such, jokes invite agreement or affirmation. If I make a joke and you don't laugh, either it isn't a good joke or a joke at all, or it's been lost in the translation of my delivery. This shared element is even more public than when we collectively experience a film or artwork. Our laughter audibly indicates whether we are sharing a similar reaction. It is immediately evident how we feel about how a joke frames a context. Infernal, how am I doing? Or how are you, Ding? I ding very well, Infernal. Thank you for asking about how I ding. We're reading this paper on, Wittgensteining jokes and what it is to crack a joke, basically. Yeah, ding, 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 dong, too. Exactly. How are you, Han? I hope you're doing well. So, yeah. I don't know. Things are, up in the air. So we'll see how things are going. But, like, so far this paper's okay. It's not that long. I found it yesterday. I was like, you know what? This is going to make I think, maybe not the best content, but it's going to be at least something I find interesting. So we're talking about jokes and what is the use of humor in conversation. So this is, nearby some of the stuff I've been thinking about. So I'm happy about this. Yeah, so it is immediately evident how we feel about how a joke frames a context. Yeah, I was thinking Vipers would like it too. This was one of the things that Vipers was asking about philosophy of humor. So he was the one that got me thinking about the topic again. So then I saw this, I was like, yay. Well, Vipers can always catch the VOD, although he'll be sad he can't make snarky comments. In his biography of Wittgenstein, Norman Malcolm writes that Wittgenstein once said that a serious and good philosophical work could be written that would consist entirely of jokes. Far from being trivial, jokes illustrate something for us about how we see things. Our attitudes about our beliefs are I can't speak all of a sudden. Our beliefs are inextricable from what we believe. The attitudes about our beliefs are inextricable from what we believe. Critchley picks up on this and, steering away from Kant's rather bland remarks on humor, claims that he would rather make a more Wittgensteinian point and speak about jokes as clarificatory remarks than that make situations perspicuous that provide us with some synopsis or overview of a particular state of affairs. Now, do jokes really give us an overview? Yeah, they might. That might actually be a good point. That they do make wider points than, instead of like not a narrowing, but it's like a wider point than you were talking about. Okay. More specifically, for Critchley, jokes reveal to us familiar experiences in a new light and are, as such, a kind of anamnesis, a reminder of what we already know. They bring us back to a shared world. It does this in two ways, by reinforcing a sense of cultural distinctiveness or superiority on the one hand, or by throwing those shared practices into question by showing them in a new light. For a comedian like Eddie Izzard, Critchley writes, "A simple trip to the laundrette turns into a surreal phantasmagoria with clothes taking on personalities, and Eddie's socks arrive half an hour late, complaining about being stuck in traffic and demanding to be let into the washing machine." Furthermore, we might appeal to Wittgenstein's remarks on aspect seeing to amplify the point. I contemplate a face and yet suddenly notice its likeness to another. I see that it has not changed and yet I see it differently. I call this experience noticing an aspect. And I mean, y'all should know that's one of the reasons why I have my duck rabbit. If you are subscribed, you can see that you can have a duck rabbit. And this is what is noticing an aspect. If you look at it from one sort of perspective or an aspect, it looks like a duck, and then from another one it looks like a rabbit, and like the different parts of the duck rabbit take on like different aspects depending on how you're looking at it. Like, so if you look at the ears of the bunny, it looks one way, and then you see another part where it's the mouth, and then if you switch it around and look at it from a rabbit, the mouth, the ears take on like being the mouth of the duck, the bill, and so it's like you see these things in different ways. Yeah, so that's what noticing the aspects are. So the author says the comedian offers their ability to see these aspects, and ultimately, as Wittgenstein says, we see it as we interpret it. Yeah, so you see the duck bill, and so you see the bill as you interpret the bill. Notice, though, Wittgenstein's emphasis on the union between our understanding and our sensory experience. Meanwhile, Critchley goes on to argue this reframing element of humor is an abstraction that is a kind of anesthesia of the heart that allows us to distance ourselves from our experience. Thank you. I didn't make it. I found that in 2002 or 2003. It then got lost from the internet. I found it on the internet like in 2002 or 2003. It then got lost from the internet, and I am the only source for that, and it has now again proliferated throughout the internet. If you do a reverse image search for that duck rabbit, it leads back to my stuff. Like this gone to other sites, but it all leads back to me originally. And like I saw someone actually got a giant tattoo of it on like their side. So someone has a giant duck rabbit tattoo on it. Yeah. Metal, yes. So. Oh, meta. Okay, yeah. Well, I find it interesting. It was basically, I found it on the internet. It got lost, and then I reposted it like in 2008, and everything goes back to that original like 2008 reposting from now on. So it disappeared and then came back like from pre-internet days, basically. Okay. Critchley's remarks view what humor does as an intellectual. This point diverges from Wittgenstein's, whose larger point is that our beliefs are inextricable from our attitudes about those beliefs. Yeah, so this is the thing. If you look at it as a rabbit, it's like you see it as a rabbit, and like the beliefs are how you see it. And then when you switch over to the duck, then your attitude about it being a duck is how you see it. There's no like intermediate step there. You don't have to think about it to see it the way you see it. Author says, contrary to the academic impulse to locate humor in the abstract intellect, my claim is that its power resides in the fact that we experience it with our bodies. There is a distancing of one perspective, perhaps, but it's replaced by the impact of the comedian's perception. My unreflective frustration at the routine difficulty of keeping track of socks during a laundry cycle is suddenly replaced by a sense that, yeah, it does seem sometimes like the socks are being inconsiderate. Izzard's reframing of that experience strikes me precisely because it has a visceral resonance rather than a distance. So we learn something So we learn something in an immediate instinctive way. I don't know if this is like you mean learn here. Like this is a weird sentence because I don't think we're learning anything about the socks, but you do perceive something in an immediate instinctive way. You perceive it differently. Yeah. Consider how we speak about jokes as landing, or how things strike us as funny, or how the conclusion to a setup is the punchline. Jokes have a visceral impact. Yeah, and see, this is why I don't like this term learn, because you don't learn things. You might learn some things viscerally, but that doesn't sound like what most people mean. Like, it's not like you go to school and learn something viscerally. You learn not to piss someone off after they smack you, then you've learned that viscerally. But that's not usually what That's an uncommon thing nowadays, I think. As such, they cannot be reduced to the sum of their parts, but have to be experienced as a whole. There is nothing unfunnier than trying to explain to someone a joke they don't get. The eventual logic might come across, but the magic gets lost. This echoes what Wittgenstein wrote about poetry in a letter to Engelmann. If you do not try to utter what is unutterable, then nothing gets lost. But the unutterable will be, unutterably, contained in what has been uttered. It doesn't seem a stretch to draw a parallel here between what he says about poetry and the force of jokes. The form of the joke communicates something that direct, explicit language cannot. This new perspective may not offer a different quantity of information, but a new way of looking at the facts. We realize something about what we're seeing or experiencing, and it takes on a new meaning. Referring to the famous duck rabbit, that's what we've been just talking about in chat, like that's right down there. Wittgenstein writes, and I might distinguish between the continuous seeing of an aspect and the dawning of an aspect. The picture might have been shown to me, and I have never seen anything but a rabbit in it. The comedian takes our ordinary experience and transforms them for us, not by changing what we experience, but by making it salient. I don't know about this, like, salient. I don't know what this actually means. How do you make something salient? Like, this is a deeper problem. Like, if you've only ever seen, like, the rabbit in the duck rabbit, and then someone tries to describe, well, look, you go where the rabbit's ears are, and that's really the bill, and the eye is now facing the other direction, and the rabbit's foot is now the duck's tail or something. So it's like you have to sort of do that, and you make it salient that way, but that doesn't actually tell you how, like, the experience of, like, looking at like a duck. So it's like, and that's not what happens in a joke. That's explaining the joke, and that's not what the comedian does here. So I'm a little, like, I agree with what the author's saying here. I'm not loving the presentation. Like, I think they're right. I just don't like the sort of phrasing that they have on a few of these things. Like, the learn is not the right word here, and making it salient is not exactly what the comedian's doing. Okay, but these are not important. These are not, like, big gripes. Okay, 3. Dissensus communis. Jokes can highlight the similarities between two things that might ordinarily seem very different. They can also point out meaningful differences between our expectations and reality. Critchley also suggests that some humor arises from what he calls a dissensus communis, distinct from the dominant common sense. These sorts of jokes indicate how things could be otherwise. His remarks on this end here, but this seems a good way to identify another dimension of the kind of humor I am trying to illuminate. Turn to a specific example. A friend of mine, Marianne, was walking along the street with her cousin, Matthew, when she was catcalled. Without missing a beat, her cousin turned to the guy, winked, and said, "Why, thank you." She described it as wonderfully deflationary, neither an escalation to fight nor something that made me feel self-conscious. Her description underscores the way Matthew sidestepped the double bind. Alright, so for those who are confused at what happened here, I mean, I think this makes sense, but you have to have a picture. The chance of a guy getting catcalled, I was thinking in New York it could happen, but then probably wouldn't. So most places in the world, if you're getting catcalled, it's a guy catcalling a girl, and whatever. And so then pretending, like, her cousin Matthew, either pretending or accepting it as directed at him, takes the, deflects it off her. I'm sure I didn't actually have to explain this to anyone, but, like, it kind of, getting the details right on this sort of example make a difference. Okay, her description underscores the way Matthew sidestepped the double bind, but he did so in a creative, edifying way. His response completed the exchange in a dissatisfying way for the catcaller. In his attempt to perform masculinity by objectifying a woman, Matthew accepting the remark and winking back presents Matthew as the intended audience, not only deflecting attention away from Marianne, but injecting a homoerotic dimension likely to provoke the homophobia of the catcaller, creating embarrassment and anxiety in him rather than Marianne. Instead of a routine performance of bravado that we might ordinarily brush off without much thought, Matthew revealed the insecurity that underlies it. Contrary to Critchley's claim that jokes distance us from experience, the jokes that interest me here bring us back into our experience in a new and uncanny way. The comedian makes a joke that illuminates something we already knew but didn't know, presents the information in a new way, and making that public can change the performative force of the initial utterance. Okay, so I think we're finally getting somewhere here. It's that the performative force of the initial utterance is getting changed. So when you say something, what did you mean by it? Now, it's not only what did you mean by it, what did you do by it? What did you do when you said, like, make a cat call? What do you do when you say, I now pronounce you man and wife? So it's like this sort of thing. That's the performative thing. Now, if you can go back and change the performance beyond what was just said, that's a different thing. So that's kind of interesting. Let me take another example in which the target of a catcall turns the exchange around. A friend of mine, Lisa Ann Wegner, is an artist whose installation was part of the 2013 Nuit Blanche art exhibit in Toronto. Her piece was called The Queen of the Parade and involved a 20-foot-high dress. At the top, Lisa stood on a platform designed to look as though she was wearing the dress. On the front of the skirt was a 10-foot-tall screen which depicted a video recording of her stocking legs walking, complete with sound of her heels clicking on the treadmill. Alright, so she's like a giant. That's kind of fun. During the night, people would mill around the bottom of the skirt, looking up at her, sometimes waving and shouting greetings. Late in the night, in front of the crowd, one man climbed halfway up an adjacent pole and shouted up at her for the entire crowd to hear, "I'm going to jerk off to you tonight." In response, Lisa looked down, smiled, pointed right at him, and said with a tone of amusement, "You're the third person to say that to me tonight." The crowd burst into laughter, and the man flushed with embarrassment. Again, an attempt at asserting privilege was overturned. Lisa's installation presented her as an imposing figure. His reaction to this was to belittle her, to assert that to him she was reducible to a sexual object for his own gratification. Lisa's simple and astute response informs him that what he took to be an assertion of his power revealed his own banality. That, in stark contrast to her and her artwork, he as an individual had absolutely nothing to offer. His attempt to reduce her individuality to her gender culminates in her reminder that it is precisely his individuality that is in question. Critchley writes that humor of the dissensus communis shows how things could be otherwise, but these are cases in which it's more accurate to say that they reveal how things are already otherwise. Much of the writing on both sensus communis and dissensus communis presumes that our social set of meanings is rather monolithic, but what these exchanges bring out are the ways that as a community we already contain subsets of communities, some of which are heard often, others of which are frequently overlooked or silenced. Lisa's simple yet witty reply revealed that man's comments as sexist. Moreover, she was able to harness the power of a large audience whose laughter affirmed her reframing of the exchange. She may or may not have educated her interlocutor, but she certainly had a powerful impact on the bystanders. Alright, so that's not a bad... Like, how are we looking at humor? So it says, look, there's background knowledge, and then it's a rejection of certain background knowledge. And so it's like the certain community-based background knowledge, and there could be other ways of looking at the background knowledge. And what they're saying here is we're getting more specific in the subgroups of a background knowledge community. So is that kind of what underlies humor as a way of distinguishing subgroups of people? So yeah. Yeah, I don't doubt it's that way, Infernal. Like, this is this is how it is most places. Okay. So let's see. Is this really like so this is like identity politics though in humor. So like this is an identity politics response to humor. So it's like basically you're saying, look, I'm not in your subgroup, I'm in my subgroup, or your subgroup is dumb. So this could actually go back to the social standing theory, which is kind of interesting. And so it's like you're reordering your social status by like social groups. So it's not just, feeling about putting other people down, but by showing that other people are part of bad groups. So that's kind of interesting. This may actually go back to the social standing theory of humor. It's kind of interesting that we're circling around to a very old theory. Okay, audience responsibility. The laughter we express at jokes makes comedy something which doesn't just seek assent, but for which assent or dissent is immediately obvious, both to ourselves and those around us. The phenomenon of laughter is complex, and I won't diagnose the many varied reasons we laugh in the space of this paper, but one minimal thing I will say is that what our laughter does is express acknowledgement. We laugh because something resonates with us, because we recognize the truth of it in some way. And as any stand-up comedian will attest, audiences are nothing if not brutally honest. It also communicates to us, possibly better than simply thinking could, how we experience the world. My final comments will be about the responsibility that attends both the truthfulness or the lack thereof of jokes and the laughter that acknowledges them. Lisa's retort and Matthew's wink go beyond merely communicating an alternate worldview. They reject the initial gambit, or perhaps we could say refuse the language game, by replacing one picture of the world with another, and as such are a kind of challenge. These responses ask the other to take responsibility for their words and the ideology that lies behind them. Discussing Wittgenstein's approach to seeing as in relation to film, Cavell notes that the ideas Wittgenstein enters with that concept have to do with my relation to my own words and with the point at which my knowledge of others depends upon the concepts of truthfulness and interpretation. I gotta reread this sentence. I'm not getting some of these sentences. It's just the language here is odd to me. The ideas Wittgenstein enters with that concepts have to do with my relation to my own words and with the point at which my knowledge of others depends upon the concepts of truthfulness and interpretation. Empirical statements that claim truth depend upon evidence. Statements that claim truthfulness depend upon our acceptance of them. My acceptance is the way I respond to them, and not everyone is capable of the response or willing for it. I put this by saying that a true statement is something we know or do not know. A truthful statement is one we must acknowledge or refuse to acknowledge. Okay, so yeah, like either you laugh at the joke or you did, and that is an acknowledgement of understanding what the joke teller was saying. Responding to someone's joke by laughing at it is an audience's way of acknowledging the truthfulness of it. Cavell rightly distinguishes between truth and truthfulness, and to put it another way, we might think truth is what we know intellectually, but here truthfulness describes what feels real to us, regardless of our intellectual commitments. Laughter at a joke, then, has an epistemic and rhetorical force, where some views are acknowledged as truthful and others are not. Excuse me. There is a kind of attendant responsibility to that power. Cavell also references Wittgenstein on this point, writing that Wittgenstein is known for his emphasis on the publicness of language, but his emphasis falls equally upon the absoluteness of my responsibility for the meaning I attach to my words. Publicness is a shared responsibility. If what we share is superficial, that is also our responsibility. This shared responsibility cannot be meaningfully separated from the role of the audience and their laughter. This is addressed explicitly by Hannah Gadsby in her 2018 comedy special, Nanette. Infernal says, I think that in the context of a joke, it depends on how you perceive the world around you. Like when I was younger, it was okay to make fun of Jewish people, for instance, because we don't have an attachment to them until political correctness came around and stopped. Yeah. So I think this is really part of the thing where they were saying like this sort of group understanding of the world, this sort of like consensus, like your communal consensus or like disconsensus, like what does the group actually sort of allow for. So yeah. And says the same way that it was less common now but still present, encouraged to make fun of poor indigenous black people because this is a super classist society. Yeah. And so it's not just, I think the author is arguing along these lines, but they're saying it's more along the lines of sort of like the politics of it, not just what you have an attachment to or not, but like it's sort of the identity of the group allows for you to group yourselves in certain ways. So yeah. And so this is like the I guess in this context, it's like the linguistic community. What are you have a common sort of perception of the world based on how you talk about the world in some sense. And so what you have a responsibility for how you talk about the world, but like that's just going to reflect how your society is anyway. What sort of things you take as like the communal background or not communally in the background. Yeah, but it's a good point. It's like, how does this actually get integrated into society? Well, the language is going to reflect the sociology, I guess, in this case. So this is, we're going to be talking about Nanette. The particular genius of this show, in my view, is not only the insight she offers regarding issues of being an oppressed minority in comedy, but how she weaves her point into her show performatively. The first half hour seems like a normal comedy show. She tells self-deprecating jokes about being a lesbian from a rural town in a remote part of Australia, casually forgetting to come out to her grandmother, and about how she narrowly evaded a violent beating from a guy who initially thought she was another man hitting on his girlfriend. She peppers this section with the refrain, "Just jokes though, just jokes." A third of the way in, however, the tone begins to shift. She discusses the performative structure to most stand-up comedy, drawing her attention to the all-too-familiar comedic convention of self-deprecation she's been invoking. Participating in this conversation, she explains, has felt like she was punching down at herself in exchange for the audience's permission to speak. Furthermore, she has intensely edited her jokes, prioritizing the comfort of the audience over subjecting them to the harsh reality that she was in fact too full of self-hatred to ever come out to her grandmother, and that it turns out she didn't evade the beating after the man felt that he had social license to beat her up because she was gay. Her claim in the show is ostensibly that she needs to quit comedy, but we might turn this claim around and see it as an invitation. Gadsby will only continue to perform stand-up so long as she no longer has to participate in these entrenched comedic conventions that prevent her from speaking truthfully. Whether audiences will accept that is up to them. The undeniable success of her subsequent special Douglas, released by Netflix in 2020, was her answer. Okay, so what's interesting here is she's saying, look, her comedy is her way of, like, you know, calling her own background bullshit. Like the way she was thinking about the world, she was trying to step away from that, and through her comedy she was editing out all like her anger, but like that only was just showing that she was angry, that this is the whole point was what she was writing. So like, what's the performance there? She has an explicit performance. She's a stand-up and she does it, and so she has to, you know, will she be truthful about what she wants to say? And then I guess the author is saying, well, she actually does pull it off anyway. But I mean, I don't know. What was the content of the next comedy special? I don't know. Although people liked it, I guess, because it was successful. Continuing. She also asks us to reflect on what we laugh at. In retrospect, we, the audience, have been unwittingly complicit in a damaging dynamic. A new aspect dawns, as Wittgenstein might say, and the refrain from the first half of the show now appears deeply ironic. Her jokes were never just jokes, they have the potential to cause real harm. Her show isn't just about her own career, but a general call for a reckoning, asking us as a society who we diminish, who we give permission to speak, and what pictures of the world we affirm with our laughter. What I hope I've started to draw attention to here is one of the many ways humor is a discursive force that has not only the potential to edify in aesthetically unique ways, but to help someone who has, we might say, been discursively cornered by offering alternate ways of responding. These help deflect attention away from the target and often cast a light on the initial oppressive utterance in a way that calls the underlying worldview into question and, further, asks the utterer to take responsibility for the way they see things. Our ability to do this also depends in part on the assent or lack thereof of the audience, allowing audiences to be active rather than passive bystanders, but precisely because of that reveals the responsibility of the audience to consider how they too see things. Jokes are rarely just jokes. Our own visceral reactions can tell us more accurately and immediately than our thoughts which ways of seeing the world resonate with us and which do not. Okay, So what do we think of this? This is not bad. I mean, I don't think there's like a huge amount of it's a short paper. They did a good job. The author did here, I think. I had a few minor gripes. I guess the main thing is, can we reframe speech that we dislike or disagree with by using a joke? Yes. How does that work? Well, they've suggested what I was saying up here is that they're kind of pulling this subsets of communities. So like, yeah, you can be part of like the general background community, but that actually can be broken down into more like smaller communities, so sub communities. And then from different sub communities, you can have different perspective on things. So that's the question. How do you actually do this? How do you reinterpret things based on different sub-communities? So, for instance, like one time, like along the lines with her friend's cousin who, may or may not have been gay. And so when someone catcalled, assuming the catcalled his female cousin, he took the compliment. I once made a joke that required me to be gay, and then someone asked me, "Are you gay?" I was like, "No, I didn't think." They were like, "I didn't think you were gay." I'm like, "I'm not gay," but like that was the point. You needed it for the joke. For that little bit of time, the humor was more important than like asserting whether I was gay or straight. Like that didn't matter. But like it made it for a good joke, and everyone laughed. I was like that one time I made a good joke. Now there's only 2 people there, so it's not like even everyone. But it's like which sub community are you actually in? And how do you like navigate that? And so this is the sort of thing we're doing, like not identity politics, but identity subgroups of language users. And can you reinterpret the speech from one group in terms of the speech of another group in a way that is useful to you? So that's a good question. And what is the sort of like that interaction there? And jokes, I think this is a good point. So like when you're doing even a dumb joke, like a pun, where you're using like bank, like the bank as in like the side of a river and the bank of like a financial institution, this is clearly 2 subgroups of stuff. Aristotle says, doesn't Robert Brandom have a line like, "Truth is what your friends let you get away with saying"? Yes. Oh, actually, I don't know if Robert Brandom has said that, but I agree that like I've heard that before. So yeah, that's a good line, Aristotle. If anyone doesn't know our good buddy Aris, actually should shout out both people, but I can only shout out one at a time, so no, wait, can't. That's not true. Everyone should go check out Aris, and we should also go check out Anne, who are both excellent streamers, by the way. Now we got some people here. Hey, and that's what they look like. So yeah. But like this is the point, that we've got these 2 concepts, and I hope you're doing well, Aris. I'm thinking about the comments you wrote on the paper. I think you're, as usual, right. So things got a few things have to be changed. We're working on a paper, for anyone who doesn't know. But yeah. The what was I gonna say? Yeah, so we've got like different sub communities, and so I guess the Robert Brandom line is good because it's saying your friends are like your particular little like sub community there, and so switching sub communities at will in some sense is part of humor. Is that a good point? Because that seems like what the main point of this paper is. That is a separate point from like all other theories of humor, like the incongruity theory, the what are the different theories here? Yeah, so the relief theory is, of course, like, oh, you're relieved, you thought it was one way, it was not that way. So it's like, someone might start off being really, really racist, and then you're nervous that, like, your buddy's racist, and then it turns out they're not. It was just, like, all a setup to make you think they were being racist, but then something else happened, so you get relieved, and you're like, oh, God, this guy I thought was, like, not a jerk. Turns out not to be a jerk, it was all a setup. That's relief. But again, you could frame this as sub-community, like, inter-community fighting. And then, of course, you could take pleasure in the superiority over others. Again, inter-community fighting. And then the laughter is a release of nervous energy. That would be like, what would that be? That would be basically like sort of like the voices in your head, speaking of Freud. like subconscious, like sub parts of your own psychology sort of fighting. So that wouldn't be sub community, that would be like sub bits of your mind. Yeah. So, but like, so this is interesting. This is basically questioning the agency with which humor operates. Like, who is the agent in humor, and where do they place themselves? And that's what the part of responsibility is here. It's like, where do you place yourself in terms of like which communities and what you think is you're responsible for? Aristotle says, reminds me of the Pierre Bourdieu comments about art. Rather than taste classifying art good or bad, it classifies the classifier, someone who holds X as good or bad. So it reveals something about your identity and which groups you belong to. Yeah, I think that's exactly in line with what this author is saying here. And the jokes are basically revealing that. So you can switch things, and the jokes are revealing what sort of your taste is. And then also by using jokes in a smart way, you can demonstrate that your taste is better than someone else's by, showing what their taste is in their joke, by making it clear what sort of group they're in, that like that they have bad taste, basically, by showing your taste being, from one group versus another group. So yeah. So this is interesting. I think like this author is very much in that Pierre Bourdieu sort of mindset about what counts as what jokes reveal about people. So hope you're well, Aristotle, and you're having a good break, because I know school just ended and get to have a well-deserved few days off. Habitus and field for sure, yeah. Yeah. Okay, cool. I don't know if I have a whole lot more to say. I always like these things. Like, I got to mention my duck rabbit, which I always like doing. Duck rabbit. Yay, duck rabbit. So, yeah, let's see. What else is it? So, we've got like community. No, it's like sub-community perspectives on things. So, it's shifting sub-community perspectives. Okay. I don't know if I have anything else to say. Let me know if you have anything to say.